The thing about wrestling is that it strips everything down to the most basic truth. Either you're stronger or you're not. Either you want it more or you don't. There's no pretending on the mat. No hiding behind careful words or practiced smiles. It's just you and another body, and whoever breaks first loses. I'd been wrestling since freshman year, and by senior year, I thought I understood the rules. Keep your head down. Work harder than everyone else. Don't give them reasons to look too closely at you. The mat was the only place I could shut off the constant noise in my head, the careful calculations of how to stand, how to speak, how to be normal enough that no one asked questions I couldn't answer. Then Marcus transferred in 3 weeks into the season. Coach Williams introduced him on a Tuesday right as we were warming up. "This is Marcus Chen. He's got experience, so don't go easy on him." Marcus nodded at the team with this easy confidence that made my stomach twist. He was built like a wrestler, compact, all lean muscle and sharp angles, but there was something else about him. The way he moved like he owned every space he entered. The way his dark eyes swept the room and seemed to catalog everything, everyone. When his gaze landed on me, I looked away fast and focused on my stretches. "You any good, new guy?" Tyler called out. Tyler was our 165-pound starter, cocky as hell, but backed it up on the mat. Marcus shrugged, pulling off his hoodie. "Good enough." The simplicity of it should have been arrogant, but somehow it wasn't. It was just fact, delivered without apology. I found myself watching the way his shoulders moved as he warmed up, the precision in how he tested his flexibility. Everything about him was controlled, deliberate. We ran through conditioning first, sprints, bear crawls, the usual torture that separated wrestlers from regular people. Marcus kept pace with our best guys without breaking a sweat. When we moved to technique, Coach paired him with different partners to see what he could do. I was working on sprawls with Jamie when I heard the sharp slap of bodies hitting the mat harder than usual. Marcus had Tyler on his back in under 30 seconds. "Lucky shot," Tyler muttered, getting back to his feet. "Sure," Marcus said. "Yes." But there was a smile playing at the corners of his mouth that said otherwise. They went again, 20 seconds this time. By the third takedown, the whole team was watching. Marcus moved like water, fluid, always finding the path of least resistance until suddenly he wasn't, until he was all explosive power driving through Tyler's defense. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "All right, that's enough," Coach called out. "Marcus, you're 160? "Yeah." I felt my stomach drop. I was 160, had been all season. Coach's eyes found mine across the mat. "Reed, come work with Marcus. Show him how we do things here." I'd been wrestling long enough to know that tone. This wasn't about showing Marcus anything. This was about seeing if I could handle him or if my spot was about to disappear. I walked over, trying to keep my face neutral. Up close, Marcus was maybe an inch shorter than me, but he felt bigger somehow, more solid. When we shook hands, his grip was firm and warm, lasting just a second longer than necessary. "Go easy on me," he said, and I couldn't tell if he was joking. We started standing. I shot for his legs immediately, better to establish dominance early, but somehow he wasn't there anymore, and then I was face down on the mat with his weight pressing into my back. "Good shot," he said near my ear, his voice so quiet only I could hear. Telegraphed it a little. Heat spread up my neck. From embarrassment, I told myself, nothing else. We reset. This time I was more careful, more patient. We circled each other, looking for openings. Marcus moved differently than anyone I'd wrestled. There was a looseness to him that made it hard to predict what he'd do next. When he finally committed to a takedown, I was ready for it, or thought I was. He hit a duck under so smooth I barely felt it happening until I was airborne. But I managed to sprawl at the last second, and suddenly we were tangled up, both fighting for position. This close, I could smell his deodorant, something clean and sharp, could feel the heat coming off his skin. We scrambled for what felt like forever, neither able to secure a dominant position. My lungs burned and sweat dripped into my eyes, but I couldn't let him win, not in front of everyone, not on my first day meeting him. Finally, I managed to slide behind him and lock my arms around his waist. I had him, just needed to drive through, and he grabbed my wrist and pivoted, and suddenly I was the one being lifted. The world spun, and then I was on my back with Marcus settling his weight on top of me, pinning my shoulders to the mat. "Time," Coach called. Marcus didn't get up right away. For a moment that stretched too long, we just looked at each other. His chest was rising and falling against mine, and I could see myself reflected in his dark eyes. There was something there, some question I couldn't name, and I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with wrestling. Then he smiled, small, almost private, and pushed himself up. "Good match," he said, offering me his hand. I took it, letting him pull me to my feet. His palm was rough with calluses, and I found myself noticing the way his fingers wrapped around mine. "Yeah," I managed. "Good match." But as I walked back to get water, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been competing for something entirely different than what everyone else saw. The next few weeks settled into a routine. Marcus integrated into the team like he'd always been there. He had this way of making people laugh without trying too hard, and even the seniors seemed to accept him. He was good, better than good, but he didn't make a big deal about it. Just showed up, worked hard, and steadily made everyone around him better. Coach started pairing us together more often. "Similar skill level," he said, but I wasn't sure that was true anymore. Every time we wrestled, Marcus seemed to be holding something back, like he was more interested in the puzzle of me than in actually winning. It should have been frustrating. Instead, I found myself looking forward to those moments when we'd lock up, when the rest of the world would fade away and it was just us testing each other's limits. "You're getting better," Marcus says, "SCC." Us and one afternoon after practice, we were the last ones in the locker room taking our time getting changed. Most guys rushed out as soon as they could, but Marcus seemed to enjoy the quiet after everyone left. "Thanks," I said, pulling my shirt over my head. In the mirror across from my locker, I caught him watching me. Not obviously, not in a way anyone else would notice, but I was starting to recognize the weight of his attention. "You could be really good," he continued, turning back to his own locker, "if you stopped holding back." "I don't hold back." He laughed out soft and knowing. "Sure you don't." The conversation stuck with me through dinner, through homework, through lying in bed staring at the ceiling. Did I hold back? In wrestling, maybe. In everything else, definitely. But that was survival. That was how you got through high school without becoming a target. The next day, I decided to test his theory. We were working on escapes, starting from the bottom position. When it was my turn under Marcus, I exploded upward with everything I had. Caught him off guard and spun around to take his back before he could react. "There we go," he said, sounding pleased even though I'd just scored on him. "That's what I'm talking about." We reset, and this time he was ready. When I tried the same move, he sprawled hard and drove me back to the mat. But instead of just controlling me, he leaned down close to my ear. "Better," he whispered, "but you're still thinking too much." His breath was warm against my neck, and I felt something low in my stomach clench. This was dangerous territory, the kind of response that could give me away if I wasn't careful. I pushed up hard, trying to create space, but Marcus rode me easily. His thighs bracketed my ribs, and I could feel the strength in his legs as he adjusted his position. "Relax," he said. "Feel what I'm doing instead of trying to think your way out." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one trapped underneath, hyper-aware of every point of contact between their bodies. He wasn't the one whose heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the wrestling. But I tried to do what he said. Stopped planning 3 moves ahead and just focused on the moment, on the weight of him above me, on the rhythm of his breathing, on the way his hands splayed across my back, holding me down. When I felt him shift slightly to maintain his balance, I moved without thinking, slipped my arm through and rolled, taking him with me. Suddenly I was on top, his wrist pinned above his head, our faces inches apart. We stayed like that for a heartbeat too long. His eyes were very dark, almost black in the gym's fluorescent lighting. I could see flecks of gold around his pupils, could count his eyelashes if I wanted to. "Nice," he said quietly. His voice had a roughness to it that I'd never heard before. I realized I was staring at his mouth. "Reed, Marcus, let's go. We've got 10 more minutes." Coach's voice cut through whatever spell had settled over us. I scrambled backward, putting distance between us. Marcus sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. If he was affected by what had just happened, he didn't show it. But for the rest of practice, I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. And every time our eyes met, something electric passed between us that made my chest tight. It was after practice on a Thursday that everything shifted. Coach had left early for a meeting, telling us to lock up when we were done. Most of the team cleared out quickly, but Marcus and I lingered, ostensibly to work on a technique we'd been struggling with earlier. "Show me that arm drag again," he said once we were alone on the mat. We'd been over it a dozen times already, but I didn't argue. We started standing, circling each other in the empty gym. The overhead lights cast long shadows, and our footsteps echoed in the silence. When I shot the arm drag, Marcus defended it easily, but instead of disengaging, we stayed locked up, hands fighting for position. It felt different without the noise of the team around us, more intimate somehow. "You're telegraphing again," Marcus said, but he didn't sound like he was really focused on technique. "Am I?" We were close enough that I could see the fine sheen of sweat on his forehead, could smell the lingering scent of his shampoo, mixed with the gymnasium's familiar smell of rubber mats and old sweat. He adjusted his grip on my wrist, his thumb brushing over my pulse point. "Right there. You tense up just before you commit." I tried the move again, slower this time, more controlled, but Marcus's defense was half-hearted, and we ended up tangled together, fighting for leverage. Neither of us was really trying to win anymore. We were just moving, testing, seeing what the other would do. When I finally managed to take him down, it was gentle, controlled. I followed him to the mat and settled into side control, but I wasn't cranking for a pin. We were just lying there, breathing hard in the quiet gym. "Why do you keep letting me win?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Marcus turned his head to look at me. We were so close our noses almost touched. "Who says I'm letting you?" "You are. You're better than me. Better than Tyler, probably better than anyone on the team, but you hold back." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Maybe I like being close to you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Heat flooded my face, and I started to pull away, but his hand came up to rest on my arm. "Reed." I met his eyes and saw something there that made my breath catch. Want, recognition, the same confusion and hunger that had been eating at me for weeks. I started, but I didn't know how to finish. "I know," he said softly. "Me neither." We stayed like that, frozen in place, until the sound of janitors in the hallway reminded us where we were. I rolled away quickly, sitting up and running my hands through my hair. "We should go," I said. "Yeah." But neither of us moved. The moment stretched between us, full of things we couldn't say, things that could get us kicked off the team, kicked out of school, disowned by our families. Finally, Marcus sat up too. "Reed?" "Yeah?" "This doesn't have to be complicated." I wanted to laugh. Everything about this was complicated. But when I looked at him, really looked, I saw someone as scared and confused as I was. Someone who was taking just as big a risk by saying anything at all. "Okay," I said. It wasn't really an agreement to anything specific, but it felt like a beginning. The locker room conversation started the next week. Nothing obvious, nothing anyone else would pick up on. But Marcus had a way of timing his showers so we'd be alone, of lingering by his locker until everyone else had cleared out. We'd talk about normal things, classes, other teams, weekend plans. But underneath it all was a current of something else. "You ever think about after?" he asked one afternoon, pulling his shirt on. The locker room was empty except for us, afternoon sunlight slanting through the high windows. "After what?" "After this, senior year, graduation, what you want to do." I shrugged, not trusting my voice. The truth was I'd been so focused on just getting through high school that I'd barely let myself think about what came next. College, probably. Maybe keep wrestling if I can find a program that'll take me. You could wrestle in college easy, Marcus said. You're better than you think you are. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. He was facing his locker, shoulders tense in a way that didn't match the casual conversation. What about you? I don't know. My parents want me to focus on academics. Say wrestling is just a distraction. He turned around, leaning against the lockers. But I can't imagine not doing this anymore. Not wrestling? Not, he gestured vaguely between us. This. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning. This. Whatever this was becoming. I felt brave suddenly, reckless in the way that only happens when you're 17 and convinced the world might end if you don't say what you're thinking. I hated how close we got, I said. That first day when you pinned me, I hated how much I didn't want it to stop. Marcus's eyes went wide, and for a second I thought I'd miscalculated everything. But then his mouth curved into a smile that was relieved and hungry and terrified all at once. Yeah, he said quietly. Yeah, me too. We stood there looking at each other across the narrow space between the locker rows. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting everything in golden light that made the moment feel suspended, like we were in a bubble separate from the rest of the world. Marcus, I started, but I didn't know what I wanted to say. He pushed off from the lockers and took a step toward me, then another. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped. Can I, he started, then shook his head. Never mind. What? Nothing. It's stupid. But I could see it in his face, the want that matched my own, the same desperate curiosity that kept me awake at night, wondering what it would feel like to touch him without the excuse of wrestling. Tell me, I said. He ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up in places. I want to know what you feel like when you're not trying to fight me. The words sent heat spiraling through my chest. I reached out without thinking, my fingertips just barely grazing his wrist. His skin was warm and slightly damp from the shower, and I felt him shiver at the contact. Like this? I asked. Yeah, he breathed. Like this. We stood there with my fingers on his wrist, both of us staring at the point of contact like it might disappear if we looked away. I could feel his pulse under my thumb, rapid and strong. The sound of voices in the hallway broke the spell. We jerked apart just as the door swung open and Tyler walked in, followed by Jamie. Shit, you guys are still here? Tyler said. Practice ended like an hour ago. Just finishing up, Marcus said, his voice remarkably steady. He grabbed his bag from his locker and slung it over his shoulder. I'll see you tomorrow, Reed. He left without looking back, but I could feel the weight of what had almost happened settling around me like smoke. That night I lay in bed replaying the moment over and over. The way he'd said my name like it meant something, the way his pulse had jumped under my touch, the way he'd looked at me like I was something worth wanting. I'd spent so long being afraid of this part of myself, pushing it down and pretending it didn't exist. But with Marcus, it felt less like something shameful and more like something inevitable, like gravity pulling us together despite all the reasons we should stay apart. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later. We were working late again, the gym empty except for us. Coach had given us keys after Marcus proved he was responsible enough not to burn the place down, and we'd been taking advantage of the privacy to push each other harder than we could during regular practice. Tonight we were drilling takedowns, switching between offense and defense every few minutes, but the longer we went, the less it felt like drilling and the more it felt like something else entirely. When Marcus shot for my legs, I sprawled to defend, but instead of immediately working to escape, I let him drive me backward until we hit the wall mats. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a moment we just stayed there, him pressed against my back, both of us breathing hard. You okay? He asked, his mouth close to my ear. Yeah. But I didn't try to get away, and he didn't try to finish the takedown. We just stayed there, pinned between his body and the wall, and I could feel every point of contact between us like live wires. Reed, he said, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach clench. I turned my head to look at him over my shoulder. His face was flushed from exertion, dark hair falling across his forehead. When our eyes met, something passed between us that was more honest than anything we'd said out loud. "We should keep drilling," I said, but I made no move to get away from the wall. "Should we?" His hand came up to rest on my hip, just barely touching through my practice gear. The contact sent electricity shooting through me, and I had to bite back a sound that would have given away everything. "Someone could come in," I said weakly. "No one's coming in, it's just us." Just us. The words echoed in the empty gym, and I realized how true they were. It was after 7 on a Friday night. The building was locked. We were completely alone. Marcus's thumb traced a small circle against my hip, and I felt my resolve crumbling. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Do what?" I turned around slowly so we were facing each other. He didn't step back, which meant we were standing close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could count the freckles scattered across his nose. "This," I said, gesturing between us. "Whatever this is. We don't have to figure it out all at once," he said. "We can just see what happens." His hand was still on my hip, and I could feel the warmth of it through my shirt. I wanted to lean into the touch, wanted to close the few inches between us and find out what he tasted like. But I was also terrified of what that would mean, of crossing a line I couldn't uncross. "Marcus," I started. "I know," he said. "I'm scared too." The admission hung between us, raw and honest. I reached up without thinking, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. His skin was soft, stubbled with the beginnings of facial hair, and he leaned into the touch like he'd been starving for it. "We're going to mess this up," I said. "Probably. Get kicked off the team. Maybe. Ruin everything. Possibly." He smiled, small and crooked. "But what if we don't? What if we don't?" The possibility hung in the air between us, fragile and terrifying and beautiful. I was still trying to find words when Marcus closed the distance between us. Not all the way, not enough to be kissing, but close enough that I could feel his breath against my lips. Close enough that if I moved just slightly forward— "Tell me to stop," he whispered. Instead, I tilted my head up and kissed him. It was supposed to be gentle, experimental, a test to see what it felt like. But the moment our lips touched, something ignited between us. Marcus made a soft sound against my mouth and pushed me back against the wall, his hands coming up to frame my face. I'd never kissed anyone before, boy or girl, but with Marcus it felt natural, like something I'd been preparing for without knowing it. His mouth was warm and soft, and when he traced my bottom lip with his tongue, I opened for him without thinking. We kissed until my lungs burned and my legs felt unsteady. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard and Marcus's hair was messed up from my fingers. "Shit," he said, resting his forehead against mine. "Yeah." That was— Yeah. We stood there catching our breath, and I tried to process what had just happened. I'd kissed Marcus Chen. Marcus Chen had kissed me back. The world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. "We should probably talk about this," Marcus said eventually. "Probably." But neither of us moved. The gym was quiet around us, filled with golden evening light from the high windows. We were in our own world, separate from everything and everyone else. "I've never—" I started, then trailed off. "Me neither," he said. "Not with anyone, but especially not with a guy." Yeah, the words sat between us, loaded with everything we hadn't said, gay, queer, different, dangerous depending on who was listening. "Are we?" I asked. Marcus considered this. "I don't know what we are, but I know I want to keep finding out." That seemed like enough for now, more than enough. "Okay," I said. "Okay. Okay." He smiled, that crooked grin that had been driving me crazy for weeks. "Good, because I was really hoping you'd say that." We kissed again, softer this time, less desperate. Like we had all the time in the world to figure this out. And maybe we did. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and careful secrecy. We got better at finding excuses to be alone together, extra drilling after practice, study sessions that were more making out than studying, Long conversations in Marcus's car in empty parking lots, talking about everything and nothing while trying not to think about how his hand felt covering mine. I learned things about him that no one else knew, that he was afraid of spiders but would never admit it, that he wanted to be a teacher someday, maybe coach wrestling at a small college somewhere, that his parents had no idea who he really was, and he wasn't sure they'd love him if they found out. "Do you think about telling them?" I asked one afternoon. We were in his car behind the grocery store, ostensibly grabbing snacks before I had to be home for dinner. "Sometimes," he said. "Then I remember my dad's face when my cousin came out last year. He didn't speak to him for 6 months." I squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry. What about your parents?" I thought about my mom, who still asked if I'd met any nice girls at school. My dad, who talked about grandkids like they were inevitable. They weren't bad people, but they lived in a world where being different was something that happened to other people's children. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I hope they'd be okay with it, but yeah." We sat in comfortable silence watching people come and go from the store. Normal people living normal lives, not worried about who might see them holding hands or what it might mean. "Do you ever wish things were different?" Marcus asked. "You mean wish I was different?" "No, never that." He turned to look at me, his expression fierce. "I mean wish the world was different, so we didn't have to hide." I did wish that, every day. But I'd gotten so used to hiding that sometimes I forgot there were places where people like us could exist openly. "Yeah," I said, "all the time." "Someday," Marcus said, "when we graduate, when we get out of here, we'll find somewhere we can just be ourselves." The idea seemed impossibly distant and impossibly hopeful at the same time, but when Marcus said it, I could almost believe it was possible. Everything changed on a Tuesday night in February. We'd been staying late to work on our technique for the upcoming regional tournament. The gym was empty, the way we liked it, and we'd been drilling for over an hour when we decided to take a break. "Come here," Marcus said, sitting down on the mat and patting the space next to him. I flopped down beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched. We shared a water bottle, and I tried not to think about the fact that his lips had been on it just before mine. "You nervous about regionals?" he asked. "A little. You?" "Nah, I've got a good feeling about it." He bumped my shoulder with his. "Besides, worst case scenario, we both lose in the first round and get to watch the rest of the tournament together." I laughed. "That's a terrible attitude." "Is it? I can think of worse ways to spend a Saturday." There was something in his tone that made me look at him more closely. He was watching me with that expression I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant he was thinking about kissing me. "Marcus," I said, but it came out more like a question than a warning. "Yeah?" He leaned closer and I could smell his deodorant, could see the way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheekbones in the gym's fluorescent lighting. "We're at school," I said weakly. "So?" "Someone could—" "No one's here. Coach left an hour ago and the janitors don't come around until 10. He was right, but that didn't make it feel any less risky. We'd been careful to keep our physical contact limited to places where we couldn't be discovered. His car mostly, or the rare occasions when one of our houses was empty. But the gym felt different tonight. Maybe it was the adrenaline from a good practice, or the way the empty space seemed to amplify every sound, every breath. Maybe it was just that I was tired of being careful all the time. When Marcus kissed me, I kissed him back without hesitation. We'd gotten better at this over the past few weeks, less desperate, more exploratory. Marcus had a way of kissing that made me feel like I was drowning in the best possible way, and I'd learned that he made these soft sounds when I traced his bottom lip with my tongue. This time felt different, though, more urgent. When he pushed me gently backward until I was lying on the mat, I went willingly. When he settled beside me, propped up on one elbow so he could look down at me, I felt my heart start to race. "Is this okay?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Everything was okay when it was Marcus. Everything felt right in a way that scared and thrilled me in equal measure. He kissed me again, deeper this time, and I lost myself in the sensation of his mouth on mine, his hand threading through my hair. When he shifted to trail kisses along my jaw, I made a sound I'd never heard myself make before. Reed, he murmured against my neck, and my name and his voice sent heat spiraling through my chest. I pulled him closer, needing more contact, more weight, more everything. He came willingly, settling more fully against me, and suddenly we were pressed together from chest to hip. I could feel his heart beating against mine, could feel how affected he was by this, by us. It should have been too much, should have sent me into a panic about what we were doing, where this was heading. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. We kissed until my lips felt swollen, until I was dizzy from lack of oxygen. When Marcus finally pulled back to look at me, his hair was messed up and his mouth was red, and I thought I might die from how beautiful he looked. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi yourself." He smiled, that crooked grin that never failed to make my stomach flip. "You okay?" "Better than okay." "Good." He brushed a strand of hair away from my forehead, the gesture so tender it made my chest ache. "Because I really like kissing you." "Just kissing?" The words slipped out before I could stop them, and I felt my face go hot. But Marcus just laughed, low and fond. "For now," he said. "We've got time to figure out the rest." Time. The word seemed both infinite and impossibly short. We had the rest of senior year, but then what? College applications were due soon. Graduation was only a few months away. The future felt like this distant, uncertain thing that I wasn't ready to face. But right now, with Marcus warm and solid above me, the future could wait. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Nothing important." "Liar," I sighed. "Just after. What happens when we graduate?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on my collarbone. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I know I don't want this to end just because high school does." "Really?" "Really." He leaned down to kiss me again, soft and sure. "Whatever this is, wherever it goes, I want to find out with you." I wanted to say something meaningful back, something that would capture how he made me feel. But words seemed inadequate, so instead I pulled him down for another kiss, trying to pour everything I couldn't say into the contact between us. We were so lost in each other that we almost didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. Almost. Marcus jerked back like he'd been burned, and we both scrambled to sitting positions just as the gym door swung open. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure it was audible, and I tried to look casual while probably looking like the guiltiest person alive. "Hey, boys." It was Mr. Peterson, the night janitor. He was older, probably close to retirement, and he'd always been friendly to the wrestlers. "Working late again?" "Just finishing up," Marcus said, and I was amazed by how normal his voice sounded. We were about to head out. "Good, good. You boys work harder than anyone else in this school, I'll give you that." Mr. Peterson smiled at us. "Don't stay too much longer, though. You need your rest." "We won't," I managed. After he left, Marcus and I sat in silence for a long moment, both of us breathing hard. "That was close," Marcus said finally. "Too close." We looked at each other, and I could see my own shaken expression reflected in his eyes. We'd gotten careless, caught up in the moment, and it had almost cost us everything. "We should be more careful," I said. "Yeah." But even as we agreed, I could see the reluctance in his face that matched my own. Being careful meant fewer opportunities like this, fewer chances to be completely honest with each other. "Marcus," I started. "I know," he said. "I know we have to be smart about this, but Reed, I don't want to pretend you don't matter to me." "You matter to me too," I said quietly. "More than I know how to handle sometimes." He reached for my hand, squeezing gently. "We'll figure it out. We just have to be patient." Patient. It felt like the hardest thing in the world. The week leading up to regionals passed in a blur of intense training and nervous energy. Coach had us drilling until our bodies moved on autopilot, running through scenarios and game plans until we could execute them in our sleep. Marcus and I were careful to keep things normal during practice, but the awareness of him was constant. Every time we partnered up, every casual touch or shared water bottle felt charged with meaning. I caught myself watching him more than I should have, memorizing the way he moved, the way he talked to the younger guys with easy patience. "You're distracted," Coach said after I botched a takedown I'd been hitting consistently for weeks. "Sorry, Coach, I'll focus." But it was hard to focus when Marcus was across the mat, and every time our eyes met, I remembered what it felt like to have his hands in my hair, his mouth on mine. The night before we left for regionals, we ended up alone in the locker room again. Most of the team had cleared out quickly, eager to get home and rest before the early morning departure, but Marcus and I lingered. "You ready for tomorrow?" he asked, pulling his shirt over his head. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, but my mind was already elsewhere. Tomorrow felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. "Good," he smiled, that crooked grin that always made something flutter in my chest. "Get some sleep tonight. Big day." Yeah, big day. But as I watched him gather his things, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Part 2. I don't think this is about wrestling anymore. The words hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to take back. Marcus was still on top of me, his hands braced on either side of my head, close enough that I could count his eyelashes. Close enough that I could see the uncertainty flickering behind his dark eyes, the same confusion and want that had been eating at me for months. I didn't speak at first, couldn't. My throat felt tight, like all the words I'd been swallowing for weeks had finally clogged something vital. Instead, I just looked at him, really looked, and saw something I didn't know how to name. Something that made my chest ache and my hand shake. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Or the terrible, wonderful realization that I wasn't alone in this. The gym was silent around us, filled with that particular quiet that comes after hours of movement and noise. Our breathing seemed amplified in the stillness, harsh and uneven. Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. "Reed," Marcus said, and my name in his voice sounded different than it ever had before. Softer, more careful, like he was afraid it might break if he said it wrong. I swallowed hard. "Yeah. Are you okay?" Such a simple question, but the answer felt impossibly complicated. Was I okay? My heart was racing, my palms were sweating, and every instinct I'd developed over 17 years was screaming at me to push him away, to make a joke, to pretend this wasn't happening. But underneath all that panic was something else, something that felt like relief. "I don't know," I said honestly. Marcus shifted slightly, adjusting his weight, and the movement brought his forehead closer to mine, close enough that if I tilted my head up just a fraction— "Me neither," he whispered. And then slowly, hesitantly, like we were both afraid the other might bolt, our foreheads touched. It was the simplest contact imaginable, but it felt monumental. His skin was warm and slightly damp with sweat, and I could feel his breath against my face, unsteady and quick. We stayed like that for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, neither of us daring to move or speak or breathe too loudly. This close, I could see everything. The way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks, the small scar above his left eyebrow that I'd never noticed before, the way his mouth was slightly parted, like he was about to say something but couldn't find the words. "This is crazy," I breathed. "Yeah, we shouldn't—" "I know." But he didn't pull away, and neither did I. If anything, the space between us seemed to shrink, our faces drawing closer together like gravity was working in reverse, pulling us towards something instead of away from it. When Marcus's fingers brushed over my shoulder, it was so light I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then he did it again, his thumb tracing the line of my collarbone through my practice shirt, and the touch sent electricity shooting through every nerve ending I had. "Marcus," I started, but I didn't know what I wanted to say. Stop? Don't stop? Help me understand what's happening to me? "I know," he said again, like he could hear all the questions I wasn't asking. "I know this is impossible, terrifying." The honesty in his voice made something crack open in my chest. He was scared too, just as lost and confused and desperate as I was. "I've never done this," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't catch it. "I don't know what I'm doing." The admission hung between us, raw and vulnerable. I thought about all the times I'd watched him move through the world with that easy confidence, like he had answers to questions the rest of us were still figuring out how to ask. To know that he was just as clueless as I was felt like the most intimate thing he could have shared. "Me neither," I said. "But I don't want to stop." The words surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. I'd spent so long being careful, so long hiding every impulse that didn't fit into the neat little box of who I was supposed to be. But with Marcus, something in me had shifted. The careful control I'd maintained for years felt less important than the warmth of his forehead against mine, the weight of his body above me, the way he was looking at me like I was something worth seeing. "What if someone," he started. "No one's here, building's locked. What if we mess this up?" I thought about that, about all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons we should get up right now and pretend this had never happened. But when I looked at him, when I saw the way he was watching me like I might disappear if he blinked, none of those reasons seemed to matter. "Then we mess it up," I said. "But at least we mess it up together." Something shifted in his expression, relief and want, and something that looked almost like gratitude. His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone, and I leaned into the touch without thinking. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone harder to figure out, maybe. You're so quiet in practice, so controlled. But this," he gestured between us with his free hand, "this isn't controlled at all." He was right. Nothing about this felt controlled. I felt raw, exposed, like every defense I'd ever built was suddenly useless. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like freedom. "Is that bad?" I asked. "No," he said immediately. "No, God, Reed, it's perfect." The way he said my name made my breath catch, like it meant something more than just a collection of sounds, like it was something precious he was learning to hold. We stayed like that for a long moment, just looking at each other. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of possibility, of all the things we weren't saying, but both understood. Finally, Marcus shifted again, rolling off me to lie on his side on the mat. The loss of his weight was immediate and jarring, like suddenly remembering how to breathe but not being sure you wanted to. "Come here," he said softly, and I turned onto my side to face him. We were close enough to touch, but not quite touching, both of us suddenly shy in a way that seemed ridiculous given what had just happened. The gym felt enormous around us, full of shadows and empty space, but this small circle of mat between us felt like the only place in the world that mattered. "Hi," Marcus said, and there was something almost playful in his voice that made me smile. "Hi yourself." "So, this happened?" "Yeah, it did." He reached out tentatively, his fingers finding mine in the space between us. The contact was gentle, exploratory, like he was still asking permission even though we'd already crossed so many lines. "Every muscle in my body knows how to fight you," I said, watching our fingers intertwine. "But none of me wants to." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I kept letting you win," he said. "During practice. Not because I thought you needed me to, but because I wanted an excuse to let you pin me, to feel you holding me down." The admission sent heat flooding through my chest. All those times I'd wondered if he was going easy on me, all the moments when I'd felt like he was testing something other than my wrestling ability. "Why?" I asked. "Because it was the only way I could think of to get close to you without," he gestured vaguely, "without it meaning anything, or without anyone else thinking it meant anything." I understood. Wrestling was the perfect cover, the ideal excuse for physical contact that would have been impossible to explain any other way. Every time we'd locked up during practice, every moment of controlled aggression and strategic positioning, we'd been dancing around something neither of us knew how to name. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been thinking about this?" Marcus considered the question, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. Honestly, since that first day, when you shot for my legs and I took you down, you looked at me afterward like, he shook his head, like you were seeing something you recognized. I was. What? I thought about how to explain it, how to put into words something I'd barely understood myself. Someone else who was pretending, I said finally. Someone else who was hiding. The recognition in his eyes was immediate and profound. He squeezed my hand and I squeezed back, and suddenly it felt like we were anchored to each other in a way that had nothing to do with physical contact. God, this is so fucked up, Marcus said, but he was smiling when he said it. I transferred to a new school, joined the wrestling team, and immediately developed a massive crush on my practice partner. Crush? The word sent something warm and giddy spiraling through my chest. What would you call it? I thought about that, about the way I'd started looking forward to practice not because I loved wrestling, but because I loved wrestling with him. About the way I'd catch myself watching him in the locker room, memorizing the way he moved, about the way my heart had started racing every time he said my name. Yeah, I said, crush works. We lay there in comfortable silence, hands linked between us, both of us processing what we'd admitted. The gym was getting darker as the sun set outside, but neither of us made any move to turn on more lights or head home. This felt too important to rush, too fragile to disturb. What happens now? Marcus asked eventually. It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that made my stomach clench with anxiety. What did happen now? We were still in high school, still living with our parents, still part of a team and a community that might not understand. We were still 17 years old and figuring out who we were supposed to be. I don't know, I said honestly. I've thought about it, about guys, but I never thought I'd actually what? Actually do anything about it. Marcus nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. Me too. I kept telling myself it was just curiosity, that it didn't mean anything. But it does mean something. Yeah, he said quietly. It really does. A sound in the hallway made us both freeze. It was just a creak, probably the building settling or a janitor somewhere on another floor, but the effect was immediate. We went rigid, our hands still linked but our bodies tense with sudden panic. What if someone came in? What if they saw us lying here together, closer than teammates had any reason to be? What if they asked questions we couldn't answer? The sound didn't repeat, and after a few seconds we both relaxed slightly. But the moment had shifted, the bubble of safety we'd created suddenly feeling more fragile. We should probably, Marcus started. Yeah, but neither of us moved. The rational part of my brain knew he was right, knew we should get up and gather our things and pretend this had never happened. But the larger part of me, the part that had been starving for this kind of connection without even knowing it, wasn't ready to let go. 5 more minutes? I asked. Marcus smiled, soft and fond. 5 more minutes. So we stayed, lying on the wrestling mats in the growing darkness, hands intertwined and foreheads almost touching. Not talking, barely breathing, just existing in this space we'd carved out together. When we finally did get up, it was with reluctant, careful movements. We gathered our things in silence, both of us hyper-aware of every sound, every movement. The magic of the moment was fading, replaced by the practical realities of locks and lights and getting home before our parents started asking questions. In the locker room, we changed quickly and efficiently, the easy intimacy of a few minutes ago replaced by something more careful, more uncertain. I kept stealing glances at Marcus, looking for some sign that what had happened was real, that it wasn't just going to disappear the moment we walked out the door. He caught me looking and smiled, small but genuine, and some of the anxiety in my chest eased. Hey, Reed, he said as we finished packing up. Yeah? He was standing by the door, his bag slung over his shoulder, and there was something nervous in his expression that I'd never seen before. If I asked you to come over tonight, would you? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and risk. Coming over meant meeting his parents, meant explaining why we were spending time together outside of wrestling. It meant taking this thing between us and making it real in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. The smart thing would be to say no, to keep this contained to empty gyms and stolen moments. The safe thing would be to go home and pretend this was just an isolated incident, a moment of confusion that didn't have to mean anything. But when I looked at Marcus, when I saw the hope and vulnerability in his expression, I knew I couldn't do the smart thing, couldn't do the safe thing. I nodded. His smile was immediate and radiant, transforming his entire face. Really? Really, I managed. Okay, good. I'll text you my address. Okay. We stood there for another moment, neither of us sure how to end this conversation, how to transition from this moment back to the regular world. Finally, Marcus stepped forward and, after a brief hesitation, hugged me. It was quick, casual enough that anyone walking in would think it was just teammates saying goodbye. But I felt the way his hand lingered on my back, the way he squeezed just a little tighter than necessary. "See you tonight," he said quietly. "See you tonight." After he left, I stood alone in the empty locker room for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of an hour, everything had changed. The careful distance I'd maintained, the walls I'd built around the parts of myself I didn't understand, all of it had crumbled the moment Marcus looked at me and said he didn't think this was about wrestling anymore. Maybe it never had been. I drove home in a daze, barely paying attention to the familiar streets and turns. My mind kept replaying every moment from the gym, the weight of Marcus above me, the way his voice had cracked when he admitted he didn't know what he was doing, the simple intimacy of lying side by side on the mats. At home, I managed to make it through dinner with my parents without giving anything away, though I was sure they could see the change in me written all over my face. My mom asked about practice, and I gave her the usual non-answers. My dad mentioned college applications, and I nodded at the appropriate moments. But all of it felt like I was watching someone else's life, like I was floating above the conversation instead of participating in it. After dinner, I retreated to my room and sat on my bed staring at my phone. Marcus had texted his address, along with a message that said his parents were out for the evening, that we'd have the house to ourselves. The implications of that made my stomach flutter with nerves and anticipation in equal measure. I must have typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something simple. On my way. The drive to Marcus's house took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every red light seemed to last forever. Every turn brought me closer to something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but couldn't bring myself to avoid. His house was in a neighborhood I'd never been to before, newer construction with neat lawns and two-car garages. Normal suburban family life, the kind of place where secrets were kept behind closed doors and perfect facades. Marcus answered the door before I'd even finished knocking, like he'd been watching from the window. He'd changed into jeans and a soft gray sweater that made his eyes look darker, and seeing him in regular clothes instead of practice gear felt oddly intimate. "Hi," he said. "Hi." We stood there looking at each other for a moment, both of us suddenly awkward in a way we hadn't been in the gym. There we'd had wrestling as an excuse, physical contact as a given. Here in his house, everything felt more deliberate, more weighted with possibility. "Come in," he said finally, stepping aside to let me pass. His house was warm and lived in, family photos on the walls and the lingering smell of whatever his parents had made for dinner. It was so normal, so typical that it was hard to reconcile with the intensity of what had happened between us just a few hours ago. "Your parents really aren't home?" I asked. "Date night," Marcus said. "They won't be back until late." The information should have been reassuring, but instead it made me more nervous. Being alone with Marcus here in his space felt different than being alone with him at school, more intimate, more real. "Do you want something to drink?" he asked. "Or we could just, I don't know, hang out?" "Hanging out sounds good." He led me upstairs to his room, and I tried not to read too much into the invitation. This was just two friends spending time together, two teammates. Nothing more complicated than that. But when we got to his room and he closed the door behind us, the sound seemed to echo with significance. His room was exactly what I would have expected. Wrestling posters on the walls, a desk covered with homework and college brochures, clothes scattered on the floor in a way that suggested he'd changed outfits multiple times before I arrived. His bed was unmade, the comforter twisted like he'd been lying on it recently. "Sorry about the mess," he said, quickly gathering up some shirts from the floor. "It's fine, it's normal." He laughed, but there was nervousness in it. "Yeah, well, welcome to normal, I guess." We sat on his bed, not because it was the only option, but because it felt like the natural place to be. The mattress dipped under our combined weight, bringing us closer together than we probably needed to be. "This is weird," Marcus said after a moment. "Good weird or bad weird?" "I don't know yet." I understood what he meant. Everything about this felt simultaneously natural and completely foreign, right and terrifying, like we were exactly where we were supposed to be and completely out of our depth at the same time. "We don't have to do anything," I said. "We could just talk." "What would we talk about?" It was a fair question. What did you talk about when everything you really wanted to say felt too big, too dangerous to put into words? "I don't know. Normal stuff?" "Right, normal stuff." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay, normal question. What's your favorite movie?" It was such an ordinary question that I almost laughed. After everything that had happened, after all the intensity and confusion and raw emotion, he wanted to know about movies. "The Matrix," I said. "You? Really? The Matrix? What's wrong with The Matrix?" "Nothing, it's just, I don't know. I had you pegged for something more serious, more artsy." "What, like foreign films with subtitles?" "Maybe." I nudged his shoulder with mine. "What's yours then? Let me guess. Some action movie with explosions and car chases." "Actually," Marcus said, and there was something shy in his voice, "it's The Princess Bride." I stared at him. "The Princess Bride? Don't judge me." "I'm not judging, I'm just surprised." "Why?" I thought about it. "I guess because it's romantic, and you don't seem like the romantic type." "What type do I seem like?" The question was casual, but I could hear the weight behind it, like my answer mattered more than it should have. "Confident," I said. "Like you know exactly who you are and what you want." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. "I'm really not," he said finally. "I mean, I'm good at pretending, but most of the time I feel like I'm just making it up as I go along." The admission surprised me. Marcus had always seemed so sure of himself, so comfortable in his own skin. To know that he was just as uncertain as the rest of us felt like being let in on a secret. "We all are," I said. "Making it up, I mean." "Are we?" "I think so. I think that's just life. Figuring it out as you go and hoping you don't mess up too badly." Marcus looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in his expression that made my chest tight. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. "Yeah." "I was terrified to transfer here. New school, new team, new everything. I kept thinking I'd mess it up somehow, that I wouldn't fit in." "You fit in fine, better than fine." "Because I worked really hard to make it look that way. But the whole time I felt like I was performing, like I was playing a character instead of just being myself." I understood that feeling more than I could articulate. The constant performance, the careful calibration of every word and gesture to avoid standing out for the wrong reasons. "When did that change?" I asked. Marcus smiled, soft and a little sad. "When I met you, when we started wrestling together. For the first time in years, I felt like I could just be, like I didn't have to pretend to be someone else." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of my lungs. That he could feel that way about me, that I could be that for someone else, seemed impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. "Marcus," I started, but I didn't know how to finish. "How do you respond to someone telling you that you make them feel like themselves?" "I know it's a lot," he said quickly. "I know this whole thing is complicated and probably crazy," and I kissed him. I don't know where the courage came from, or the certainty that it was the right thing to do. One moment I was sitting there struggling for words. And the next I was leaning forward and pressing my lips to his, trying to communicate everything I couldn't say out loud. He made a soft sound of surprise against my mouth, then kissed me back with an intensity that made my head spin. His hands came up to cup my face, and I could feel him smiling against my lips. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "What was that for?" he asked. "For making me feel like myself, too." The smile that spread across his face was radiant, transforming his entire expression. He pulled me closer until we were pressed together from shoulder to hip and kissed me again. This time it was slower, more exploratory. We had time here, privacy, no risk of being interrupted. We could take our time learning the shape of each other's mouths, the sounds we made when someone's teeth grazed a bottom lip or tongue traced the sensitive spot just behind an earlobe. When Marcus's hand slipped under the hem of my shirt just barely, just enough to brush against the skin of my lower back, I shivered and pulled him closer. "Is this okay?" he whispered against my neck. "Yeah," I breathed. "Yeah, it's okay." More than okay. It was perfect and overwhelming and everything I'd been afraid to want. We kissed until my lips felt swollen, until the world outside his bedroom ceased to exist entirely. When we finally pulled apart, we were tangled together on his bed, my head on his chest, his fingers playing with my hair. "This is real," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," I said, "it's real." We lay there in comfortable silence, listening to each other breathe. Outside, it was fully dark now, the house quiet around us. I knew I should probably go home soon before my parents started wondering where I was, but I couldn't bring myself to move. "Reed," Marcus said after a while. "Hmm? I'm really glad you transferred to our school." I lifted my head to look at him. "You transferred to our school?" "Right. I'm really glad I transferred to your school." "Me too." And I meant it. Whatever this was, whatever it became, I was grateful for it, grateful for him, grateful for the way he'd looked at me that first day and seen something worth knowing. I stayed for another hour, both of us reluctant to break the spell of the evening. When I finally did leave, it was with promises to text when I got home, to see each other at practice the next day, to figure out what came next. On the drive home, I felt different. Lighter somehow, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even know was there until Marcus helped me set it down. The careful mask I'd worn for so long felt less necessary, less crucial to my survival. At home, I managed to slip upstairs without attracting too much attention from my parents. I brushed my teeth and changed into pajamas, going through the motions of getting ready for bed while my mind replayed every moment of the evening. When I finally crawled under the covers, I checked my phone. One message from Marcus sent just a few minutes ago. "I don't know what this is, but I think it's real." I stared at the words for a long time, feeling something warm and sure settle in my chest. Then I typed back, "It's real. Whatever it is, it's real." I set my phone aside and closed my eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. Every time I started to drift off, I'd remember the way Marcus had looked at me, the way he'd said my name like it meant something precious, the way it felt to be held by someone who saw me, really saw me, and didn't want me to be anyone else. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I was looking forward to it.